Make sure I got the.
All right, everybody, here we go. Drew Baye's back on the channel here. We've been talking for the last couple of weeks about the bullshit. There are some wannabe fitness influencers who are trying, with very poor effort, to debunk the claims that I suggest when it comes to optimal training for muscle hypertrophy, strength, pretty much every other aspect of physical capacity. And today we're going to explore these poor efforts to debunk my claims. And first of all, they're not mine. They're not my claims at all. I just, for one reason or another, began to popularize them. But we're going to explore the attempts to debunk these recommendations with detail, with research. So that way you guys can understand why we make these recommendations and why these critiques of these recommendations are completely and utterly false. And me and Drew are getting together today to do this and just go by things one by one. But before we got on, Drew was making an interesting statement, a true statement about training approaches, training recommendations. And go ahead, Drew.
This is the big thing that a lot of people miss. Every single person out there that is attempting to sell you on a program, that is attempting to promote a particular method of training, is going to tell you that their approach is going to give you the best results, that you're going to get bigger and stronger, faster than with everything else. It's the best thing. They've come up with the secret. They've found the special method or whatever, and they're full of shit. I don't believe that all of them are dishonest. I think most of them are just ignorant. They're misinformed. I think some of them sincerely believe what they're telling you, but they're wrong. And it is because ultimately, regardless of what you do, regardless of how you manipulate a bunch of different training variables, you can only get so big and strong. This was determined the moment you were conceived. Your potential for muscular strength and size is limited by your genetics. Any program, literally any, and I'm talking about exercise, meaning strength training, any strength training program that you do hard and progressively and consistently is going to stimulate increases in strength and size. And if the volume and frequency doesn't exceed what your body can recover from and adapt to, which varies between individuals, then you're going to be able to recover and produce the increases in strength and size stimulated by your workouts. And you will continue to do so until you are as big and strong as your genetics allowed, regardless of the program. If you could live 100 times, relive your life with the same genetics, and every time you followed a completely different exercise program, you'd end up looking about the same at the end of every single one. Your genetics have already determined your endpoint. The program is not going to make any difference in your end muscular strength and size increases over a long enough period of time. The practical differences in the effectiveness all come down to zero. But this is where they differ. Not all of them are equally time efficient, and not all of them are equally safe. And while the differences in effectiveness get smaller and smaller over time, the differences in the time you invest and the amount of wear and tear on your body and the risk of injury increase over time. So if you do something that is relatively inefficient and high risk, well, actually, depending on the possibility of injury, you may never get to your potential because you might damage yourself too severely to continue training. But assuming you avoid an injury, you're still going to waste literally thousands of hours, and you will be more likely to suffer joint and spine problems later in life that are going to affect your mobility, your overall functional ability and health and independence. And all of these things matter. Your time and your long-term health are two of your most valuable resources. What we recommend is going to get you just as strong, and it's going to get you just as big as everything else. Literally just as effective. But it's not going to beat you up, and it's not going to require you to spend more than a very short amount of time in the gym weekly. This is just as effective, but it's much safer. It's much more time efficient. The only other thing that you might not like about this is that it is much harder. A lot of people hear, oh, you only have to work out 20, 30 minutes twice, maybe 3 times a week. That can't be that hard. Well, no, because you have to train very intensely to be able to progress on a bit lower volume. So there's that. And if you do this stuff correctly, it is not great for the ego. If you actually perform exercises the way that you should, you're not going to be able to hoist super heavy weights around, because proper exercise form is much harder. Anyways, this alone invalidates almost everything else everybody recommends. Their claims of greater effectiveness are bullshit. It's just not. Your genetics have already determined it. This is going to get you there more safely and far more time efficiently. There is one other consideration, though. I mentioned earlier, you have to train hard. You have to train progressively, and you have to train consistently to stimulate your body to produce the desired adaptations. A lot of methods do this. But after that, I mentioned the volume and frequency can't exceed what your body is capable of recovering from and adapt to. And one of the biggest problems with most other programs is that they are very much cookie cutter programs, in that they tell you, you got to do this many exercises, this many sets, this many times a week, and it is just a blanket prescription for everybody. What we are talking about here, which I hate to call it high intensity training. What is commonly known as high intensity training is just another way of saying proper exercise. This is not just a different way to exercise. This is the correct way to exercise, the way that is most consistent with what we know to be true, as well as consistent with the values of long-term safety and time efficiency. Remember, what we're trying to do is improve the function of the human body. Part of that is stimulating your body to produce the desired adaptations, but another part of that, which is equally important, is minimizing the risk of injuries and long-term joint and spine problems, because injuries and joint conditions negatively affect your functional ability. This is not just about looking good at the beach or naked. This is about your functional ability and health first and foremost. So yeah, pretty much, I believe the vast majority of people who are putting information out on this sincerely believe in what they're recommending. I don't think they're all crooks. There are a few. And unfortunately, you'll probably see advertisements from some of them before or after, or maybe during. YouTube is full of hucksters advertising all sorts of bullshit programs. Not going to name any names, but you probably know exactly the ones I'm talking about. I'm fucking sick of ads. I want to
name them,
guys, head and just slam it into the floor every time I see those ads. It pisses me off so much.
I know.
Anyways,
I know.
The difference, the point I was getting to, is that this is not a program. It is a set of principles to guide the development of programs based on individual response to exercise. Every single one of you is going to have the same requirements in terms of the general principles. The principles of exercise are universal. They're the same for Dave, for me, for every single one of you. The principles are exactly the same for every person. But because of differences in genetics, because of differences in lifestyles and circumstances affecting our ability to recover from and adapt to exercise, we have to vary the application of those principles based on individual response. And a big part of this is making sure that the volume and frequency of exercise does not exceed what an individual can recover from and adapt to within some time. If you're doing too much exercise too often, it will compromise your results. And the vast majority of people should not be exercising nearly as long or as often as they do. They make the mistake of looking at the people who are or who appear to be the most successful bodybuilders, athletes, who typically have exceptional genetics. They are able to do more often without overtraining than the average person. It is a mistake to try to program for the average person based on what somebody who is to the far right of the bell curve for the ability to tolerate and recover from and adapt to exercise is able to handle. It's like going into a clothing store and you see a model on the poster and you think, well, this guy looks great in that suit. And you go and you tell the salesperson, I want that suit and I want it in the exact dimensions that are being worn by the model. Well, maybe you're shorter, maybe you're taller, maybe you're fatter, maybe you're thinner. You need the suit tailored to you or you're not going to look good in it. Maybe it won't fit you at all. And the same is true for your exercise program. You don't just copy what you think is going to work well because somebody else has gotten or appears to have gotten good results for it. You take the principles and you apply them in accordance with how your body responds. And this means you have to make some adjustments over time. You tailor your exercise program to your body in the same way that you would want a suit tailored to your body so that it fits you well. Anyways, so that alone, pretty much everything else, again, I don't want to call these people liars. I believe most of them are sincere. I believe most of them really believe what they're saying and they want to help you. They're misinformed. Although there are some people out there who are definitely being dishonest or maybe are not willing to admit things that go against the position stands of organizations who they have financial ties to.
Yeah, and the people who are, not associated or have financial ties that support this, it seems they have a lot of assumptions about a workout that are not necessarily correct. And when you apply these principles to their assumptions, this doesn't hold up because of the way they believe a workout should be performed. Now, one of my recent critics about these claims had this statement to say. He said, I guarantee if you go to failure on every set, you will hate your workouts and skip them half the time if you manage not to get injured. There are so many fucking things wrong with this statement that I did the same thing as you did when I read it. Now, I'm gonna state one of them, and then I'll let you state the rest. First of all, you are not required to enjoy your workout. The purpose of a workout is not to have fun. It is not to socialize. The purpose of a workout is a specific activity that is used to stimulate a physiological adaptation. Whether or not you have fun in the process is pointless. Drew Baye likes to use the example of brushing your teeth and showering. You do not stop brushing your teeth or find a new way to brush your teeth because you're not having fun doing it anymore, because the purpose of brushing your teeth is not to have fun. The purpose of brushing your teeth is to maintain dental hygiene. A workout should be looked at this same way. You want the most effective, time-efficient, and safe approach to stimulating a physical improvement in your body. And there is no reason that you should be changing it based on fun. You should do other things for fun. Go play tennis. Go play with your dog. The workout is a completely different thing. So this individual says going to failure is bad because you will hate your workout. Now, what else is wrong with this statement?
Almost everything. I want to extend that just a little bit to say that recreational activities, mental health, socialization, all these things are extremely important. And you should not try to compromise your recreational activities, the things that you enjoy doing, by trying to harden them for an exercise effect. And you should not compromise the effectiveness or safety of your workouts by trying to make it less unpleasant. Exercise for the purpose of exercise, stimulating improvements in functional ability, and then do other things for recreational activity. They're both extremely important. You wouldn't want to do only one or only the other, but you don't want to combine them, because when you do, you end up with something that doesn't work as well for either. Now, a couple things, but the biggest two things that jumped out. One is the assumption that more than one set is required. There have been so many people who say things like, if you go to momentary muscle failure, you won't be able to do as many sets, or you won't be able to use as much weight on subsequent sets. And this is completely pointless, because you don't need to perform more than one set of an exercise if you've done it correctly to begin with. There is no advantage. In fact, if you are actually performing your exercises to momentary muscle failure, additional sets will not stimulate any greater degree of improvement. You will have already recruited and stimulated as much improvement in all the motor units, all the muscle fibers in the muscles that you've worked. And the vast majority of research going back decades has confirmed this, as well as there's what's called the file drawer effect. And this is, I can't remember if it was one of the assistants of either Richard Winnett or Ralph Carpinelli that I was talking to. I think it was one of Carpinelli's associates actually mentioned this, I think it was Carpinelli brought up the file drawer effect. And that is that when journals receive research papers that compare different approaches and there's no significant difference in the results, often it doesn't get published because it's not interesting. Okay, if you do this or if you do this, it doesn't make any difference. Well, it doesn't make any difference, so we'll just publish something else. They want to have studies that show this is better than this, or this works, that has this effect and that doesn't. And so there have been as many studies, which is the majority, showing no advantage to multiple sets. There are a lot more that have been conducted and likely never published because of this effect.
What happened? You guys still see me? Looks like it froze for one reason or another. Oh, man. Let me see. All right, Drew's probably got a bad connection. He's going to join us in a second. I think he realized it. So what we're going to do when he comes back after explaining the single versus multiple sets, I have a research paper up that we're going to look at that compared 15 studies on single versus multiple set training done by Brad Schoenfeld. And after looking at the actual studies that they used, 10 out of the 15 showed no difference between single in multiple set training. Only 5 out of the 15 did. What was their conclusion? The conclusion was multiple set training is still more effective. Why is this happening? Well, Drew explains that a lot of these individuals conducting this research have financial ties to the organization or on the board of the organization which promotes these principles. Therefore, they have a financial incentive to conduct research that supports these principles. And that's a problem. They still, in some of the research, they keep coming out with more and more research. And if you actually read the research, say if it's a meta-analysis, and you actually look at the studies that they include in the meta-analysis, or even on the first damn page or the page that compares the studies, you'll find that what they are promoting is not actually true. Their conclusion contradicts what they found. So Drew's got his camera back up. I'm just waiting for a second. He's going to get it all set up. I'll bring him back in. Whoops.
All right. Sorry about that. Our internet went out completely here, so I'm on my phone now. We've had power kind of off and on a little. For those of you who don't know, Jay and I are both in Florida. We're in Central Florida over here, and our internet just shut off. So I've still got cellular. So hopefully this doesn't disconnect. If it comes back on, I'll jump back in the desktop. But sorry about that. I think I was talking about the issue with single versus multiple sets before everything got messed up. I don't know if you kept going on that and finished it for me.
A little bit. So what I was talking about, this is something I wanted to bring up. I wanted to share the research paper that a lot of people refer to. And let me see, tab, window. So a lot of people refer to this paper. Let me bring it up here. So this was a meta-analysis done by Brad Schoenfeld, Krieger, 2 popular names, and the dose-response relationship between weekly resistance training volume and increases in muscle mass, a systematic review and meta-analysis. So what they did is they looked at 15 studies. Okay. Their conclusion was the findings indicate a graded dose-response relationship whereby increases in resistance training volume produce greater gains in hypertrophy. Now, if you look at the study and you look at the studies they compare, you will see the first study, Bataro 2011, no significant difference in muscle thickness. Cannon and Marino 2010, no significant difference. Galvo 2005, no significant difference, no significant difference, no significant, no significant, no significant, no significant, no significant, no significant. So 10 out of the studies, 10 out of the 15 studies in this paper showed no significant difference between 1 and 3 sets. Yet their conclusion is that multiple set training provides more hypertrophy. Now, why the hell is this happening?
Probably for the same reason Richard Berger misrepresented his study on single versus multiple sets back in the early 1960s. He was afraid of the negative response from the strength and conditioning community. Now, I'm going to guess, if I don't remember, but I'm going to guess this is published in the National Strength and Conditioning Association's journal, which would also have a lot to do with it. It's basically a peer review circle jerk of a bunch of their people who want to support their position stands. The NSCA, if not mistaken, still recommends plyometrics. So kind of hard to take anything else seriously from them. Well, looks like our internet might be back. Anyway,
No, these are the papers people send me. Here is another paper that was sent to me to.
Oh shit!
If I do that.
Sorry about that.
What the hell is that?
Did not expect that. What the hell is going on? Something's with my phone here. There we go. Didn't close the window properly on there, and I had it still running on both of the echo. Sorry about that.
It's okay. We're good to go. Another thing I wanted to share is
Hopefully that echo thing is fixed. Didn't blow out anybody's ears.
Another critique that somebody sent me as proof that what I'm saying is incorrect was this study: effects of resistance training performed to repetition failure, non-failure, muscular strength, and look, it's a systematic review and meta-analysis again. So the individual sent this and said there's no difference training to failure and non-failure, and said that it's more damaging and more harmful. Well, what they said was training to muscle failure does not seem to be required for gains. However, either training in this manner does not seem to have detrimental effects on these adaptations either.
There's something about that a lot of people miss, though. Now, I don't know how many, what the population was for that study, but here's a bunch of things to consider when they talk about training to failure. First, most of these people are very unlikely to actually be training to failure, even if they are experienced trainees. It is not something that you're going to take a beginner and get them to actually work to without some time to build up to it. A lot of people who believe they are training to momentary muscle failure are not. They don't stop when they've actually achieved momentary muscle failure. They stop when the exercise is about as hard as they are willing to tolerate, or when they are having difficulty maintaining what is typically an excessive rep speed. Now, we talked about Brad Schoenfeld. I know somebody else brought up Mike Israetel, and the whole training to failure thing. I've seen video of both of them training to failure, and they're not. And this is something Mike Israetel and Lyle McDonald got into this a while back, and Lyle was absolutely correct. Israetel likes to talk about how you should keep a certain number of reps in reserve, which is bullshit. You can't even know your reps in reserve if you don't actually train to momentary muscle failure, because you don't have an actual point of reference for it. And I've seen videos, again, of them training to failure. They're not getting anywhere close to momentary muscle failure. Trying to think of the short, but there is something called the force velocity curve, which shows the variation in force that a muscle can produce at different concentric contraction velocities as well as eccentric or negative contraction velocities. There isn't a significant difference in the force at different negative contraction velocities, but there is an inverse relationship between positive contraction velocity and the force of positive contraction. As you are shortening the muscle, the faster you shorten it, the faster the myofibrils are sliding past each other, the fewer cross bridges are able to be formed, the less force, less force the muscles are capable of producing. What this means is that as you are approaching momentary muscle failure, to maintain the amount of force required, an adequate force to continue moving against the resistance, movement speed will get slower and slower until it stops. Now, most of these people, almost all of them, perform their repetitions way too fast. You'll see them take a second to lift and a second to lower. Sometimes they'll lift in a second and they'll take 2-3 seconds to lower. Very sloppy, recklessly fast, uncontrolled repetitions. And what you'll see them do is repeat these repetitions at this pace, and then maybe they'll do one rep that's a little slower and another that's a little slower, and then they'll just stop. They're not anywhere close to momentary muscle failure. If somebody is working actually close to the point of momentary muscle failure, you will see the repetition slow. Well, the positive, obviously you can still drop a weight. Your negative speed isn't going to be as affected as much, but your positive speed will just drop off as you approach momentary muscle failure. This is one of the videos. If you have the video, there's some videos of Mike Israetel that are about the same. So I think Brad lifts in about a second and takes maybe about a second or two to lower. Way too fast, a lot of body movement. Looks like he's holding his breath. He's not smoothly lifting the weight. He's kind of yanking it. He's not even holding it at the end point. Making faces. Yeah, hold it. That wasn't even a.
That's it.
And then he stopped. That is not. And he said something about this being to failure. That's not momentary muscle failure. That is not even close. And I disagree with Brad about a whole bunch of stuff. I think he's wrong about a lot of things. I don't dislike him personally, though, but I'm going to put this out there. Of course, it's going to get to him. If Brad is ever in Central Florida, I would be glad to meet him somewhere and put him through a proper high-intensity training workout. If he agrees to do exactly what I tell him and to not stop an exercise until he is told to stop the exercise so that he can learn what it is like to train to momentary muscle failure. Now, this is important because all these people claim to be comparing training to failure to not training to failure, and they're not. They're not getting anywhere close. Something else to consider, though, and this is important, is that the results from exercise do appear to have more to do with your intensity of effort than anything else. And when I say intensity of effort, I mean how hard you are working relative to how hard you are capable of working at the moment. Real quick explanation for everybody. Imagine you start an exercise using 60% of what you could lift one time. It requires 60% of your capability at the start of the exercise. But as your muscles fatigue, your capability decreases. You still have to produce the same amount of force, but your capability decreases. So to produce this amount of force requires an increasing percentage of your decreasing capability. At some point, your capability just equals and then drops below what you are required to do. And at that point, you are working as intensely as you are capable of. Intensity is not about relative load, or absolute load. It's not about your heart rate elevation or anything. Intensity is either relative effort or inroad per time, which is a whole another thing, which is related to that intensity of effort. But intensity of effort is more important than load and a lot of other factors. However, it seems that there is a threshold of intensity that is lower for beginners, and that as a trainee becomes more experienced, this intensity threshold increases. We don't know what it is. This is just based on observation. It would be very difficult to accurately measure, but everybody has noticed that beginners tend to respond well to almost everything. If you have beginners and you're training some to failure and some not to failure, because they're beginners, they might not have as high a threshold for the stimulus as somebody who is an intermediate or more advanced trainee. As you become more advanced, you have to push closer to, or eventually start working to, momentary muscle failure for best results. But if it doesn't make a significant difference for beginners, and it might not, then you're not going to see much difference comparing to failure and not to failure in beginner trainees. For the typical duration of a lot of these studies, if they're not using advanced trainees, that is going to be a problem. But even if they are using experienced trainees, how many of these people have actually trained to momentary muscle failure? How many of them are even getting close to momentary muscle failure? There's so many problems with it. And another big problem with all of these studies is that if you're going to study a lot of these things, you first need to figure out how the exercise should be performed. You shouldn't be bothering with comparing 1 or 2 sets of an exercise or 3 or 4 until you've figured out the right way to perform a set. And most of their sets are performed with excessive repetition speeds for durations that are too short, very sloppy, very low effort. If they started with a proper set to momentary muscle failure to begin with, a lot of this other stuff would be, they would end up with a lot fewer erroneous conclusions because they would not be starting with erroneous assumptions. Another problem is if you are comparing training to failure with not training to failure, performing multiple sets, well, if you are training to momentary muscle failure, you should not be performing multiple sets. You don't need to. It's not going to give you any better results. They're starting from the assumption that multiple sets are going to be more effective, which is not the case. If you train as intensely as you should, you have to be very conservative with your volume and frequency. You can train very hard or you can train long, but not both. The reason that training to momentary muscle failure can appear to be less effective if you are comparing multiple sets is not because of training to momentary muscle failure, but because you're trying to do too much. If they were to compare single set to failure versus single set not to failure, it'd be very different. You don't need to perform. And the idea that, oh, you shouldn't train to failure because you won't be able to perform as many sets, well, so fucking what? You don't start with the assumption that you need a certain number of exercises and sets at some frequency weekly and then reduce your intensity to allow for it. Instead, you perform each exercise as intensely as you are capable of, always trying to improve your ability to push yourself to momentary muscle failure, and you reduce your volume and frequency of exercise to allow for it. So they're starting with the wrong priority, volume and frequency over intensity, when they should be focusing on as intense the exercises they're capable of, and then reducing their volume and frequency to allow for it.
And
there was something else. I got so caught up in all that, I forgot what else I was going to mention.
Yeah, did you guys notice? I posted a video after of Brad Schoenfeld's extremely poorly performed set, and you can almost guarantee, I mean, his test subjects are very likely performing the sets worse. In which case, if you're performing a set with that low level of inroad, that low level of just effort and intensity, more probably is going to be better. The second video I showed was Dr. James Steele and Dr. James Fisher, who are a couple of other exercise scientists, and notice the difference how they performed a set. Slow.
I'm not sure which video I was with the internet stuff. I have seen videos of both of them, and their form is much better than what I have seen from most other people. With 1 or 2 exceptions, when they were at a particular, or one of them was at a particular gym and kind of went along with what the trainer was recommending.
Yeah.
But for the most part, when James Steele and when James Fisher have self-trained and posted videos of it, it's been really good. It's been much, much better than the vast majority of form videos you see out there.
Can you see this one?
I can see it. That's James Steele. Oh, yeah. Is that? No, that's Fisher too. That's both of them. Okay.
Yeah, it's Fisher putting Steele through a workout.
There we go. That is an appropriate cadence, an appropriate repetition speed. He's not just yanking the handles. He's taking his time with the movement. He's focusing on what he's doing. Notice the pause at the end point. And I'm betting he's going to reverse direction smoothly here without yanking. Could have been a little smoother, but that was much better than Brad. And
just the level of effort involved in this is 10 times more, which is going to reduce your volume tolerance.
Notice he's gradually getting slower. He's still trying though, and he's still now Forced reps like this a lot of times aren't necessary. I don't want to get into that too much here. If you have a piece of equipment that has a poor resistance curve, there's a little bit of sticking point. There's some benefit to providing just a barely enough force to get through that sticking point. You're basically correcting the flaw in the resistance curve in the machine. But that's a good example. That is
that machine, he didn't reach a sticking point there. He reached momentary muscle
yeah,
failure.
I was just commenting on the assistance there. Without going off on too much of a tangent, forced repetitions and things like that are useful tools in some situations in teaching beginners, but they are training wheels. When you're learning to ride a bicycle, sometimes you got to put those training wheels on until you figure out how to do it. These are intensity training wheels. They can help a person learn that they're capable of working harder than they thought they could. But once somebody has learned to do this, they don't need them anymore. And more often than not, continuing to use things like forced reps and drop sets and post-failure negatives and rest pause and all these other set extenders is time wasting. It's not just a waste of time, but it's counterproductive. It's not necessary for advanced trainings.
So I also want to share, some people think training to failure is dangerous.
Absolutely not.
Okay. So the one quote, assuming you don't injure yourself in the process. Unfortunately,
that was the thing I forgot to mention.
Yeah, so let's cover that now. A lot of people think that training to failure is dangerous, and it can be if you do not adhere to the prescribed form.
If your form is shit. Arthur Jones explained this way back in 1970 in Nautilus Bulletin 1. Where is it? Chapter 38, I think. Yes, Nautilus Bulletin 1, Chapter 38. The harder it seems, the easier it is. Now, a lot of people mistake hard for dangerous. When you begin an exercise, it feels easier because you are stronger. Again, if you start an exercise with 60% of what you could use, it only requires a 60% effort. That's not going to feel very hard. As your muscles fatigue, an increasing percentage of your decreasing strength is required to continue the exercise, even though the force you are producing is going to be the same on average. It feels harder and harder the closer you get to momentary muscle failure. The force is what we are concerned with in terms of the injury risk, not the effort. It doesn't matter that it feels harder. As long as the force is still the same, the last rep is no harder than the first. Well, how can the force change? The force can change if your behavior changes, if you alter your body position, if you alter your path or range of movement, and if you attempt to accelerate more rapidly, often by involving other muscle groups to try to heave at the weight. This is why some people are more likely to injure themselves. It's not because they're working to momentary muscle failure. It's because they're focused on the wrong thing. Your goal during exercise is to use the resistance provided by the barbell, the machine, or whatever tool you're using to challenge your muscles' ability to produce force, to deeply fatigue them within a relatively short time and stimulate your body to produce an increase in their ability to produce force, which is going to come with a size increase. That is your goal, to efficiently load, to challenge, and to deeply fatigue your muscles, to achieve momentary muscle failure within a moderate time frame. That's what you're trying to do. Not perform some number of repetitions with some number or some amount of weight. The problem is, as people approach momentary muscle failure, as they get close to achieving the real goal of the exercise, if they are thinking about the wrong thing, if instead of thinking about inroading, they are thinking about doing work, making the weight go up and down, getting reps, then they are going to behave in a way consistent with the assumed goal, the incorrect goal, and they're going to start cheating. You're not trying to make the weight go up and down. You're trying to use the weight to deeply fatigue the muscle in a way that minimizes your risk of injury. As you approach momentary muscle failure, you just keep doing the exercises strictly as you possibly can. How well you perform every repetition of an exercise is far more important than how many you do. If you start changing the exercise, changing your position, your path, range of motion, if you start heaving at the weight, yanking, jerking at whatever, what you are doing is the opposite of the correct process. The goal, when you do these things, you're trying to make it easier to move the weight. If you're making it easier, that is the opposite of what you should be attempting to do, which is to continue to challenge the target muscles. You're not trying to make the weight go up and down. You are trying to deeply fatigue it. And from the very start of the exercise to the very end, that is where you need to have your mind on achieving that real goal, deep muscular inroad with minimal risk of injury, not on making the weight move. I've said this, I've written it probably hundreds of times. Exercise is something that you do to your muscles with the weight. It is not something you do to the weights with your muscles. You need to be focused internally on the effect you are having on your muscles. You need to be focused on what you are doing with your muscles and maintaining correct body movement, not on making the weights or making the handles, pads, footboard, or whatever on a machine move. If people focus on the proper goal and they, as a result, perform the process correctly, they can work as intensely as humanly possible and not injure themselves. Because it is not how hard they are working. It is not intensity of effort that equates to danger. It is ultimately force. And there's a lot of different factors that can cause the force to become excessive. But as long as you don't alter your form or loosen your form, none of those things happen. The force, the average, obviously with variation and resistance and other things, it's going to change, but the average force is going to stay the same from the first rep to the last. The last repetition of a properly performed set is no more dangerous than the first, if your form is correct. If you have shitty form, that is how you're going to get hurt. Now, people think, oh, well, if I go to failure, I'm going to drop the weight. No, you're not. You are stronger holding a weight than you are lifting it. And you are stronger lowering a weight than you are holding it. If you achieve momentary muscle failure, you will not be able to continue to lift the weight, but you will still be able to hold it. And you will be able to lower it under control. There is, if you are using proper form, if you are using an appropriate load, one that allows you to achieve momentary muscle failure in a relatively short, and short compared to other physical activities, not compared to most people's sets, within about 1 to 2 minutes. If you're using a weight that allows you to achieve momentary muscle failure within about 1 to 2 minutes, you're using strict form, you can contract as intensely as you are capable of once you've reached that point of momentary muscle failure. And it doesn't matter how hard it feels. If you do not compromise your form, you are not going to get hurt. On the other hand, you could use a more moderate weight and sling it around recklessly. And even if you don't suffer an acute injury, which is more likely, you're more likely to have subacute injuries that are going to lead to all sorts of joint conditions over time. People following conventional programs, not training to failure, that are doing excessive numbers of exercises and sets and reps are more likely to end up with injuries than somebody who's doing a handful of exercises in strict form to momentary muscle failure. Intensity of effort has nothing to do with risk of injury. It is how you are behaving, your form during exercise. And there's a bunch of other things that proper entry and exit, how you load into and out using free weights. There's a lot of other things that affect injury risk, but when you are performing the exercise, it's not about it. You're not going to hurt yourself training a momentary muscle failure if you don't do anything stupid, if you don't loosen your form. It is absolute nonsense. But what this tells me is these people don't understand the real objective, and they don't understand the actual cause of injury, or they would know this and they'd be aware of this. And I know people are skeptical. How can you train to momentary muscle failure and not get hurt? Well, if you actually knew how you should be exercising, and if you did it this way, you would understand. But I'm not doing one-on-one, like in-person training now, just phone and online consultations. But from 94 until just a few years ago, I think I stopped doing the one-on-one training about 2017. Until just a few years ago, over that time, I have directly, in person, trained several hundreds of people and supervised, directly instructed tens of thousands of workouts over all that time. And there have been 0 injuries. Every person, after a few weeks of break-in training, nobody goes to failure starting out. You focus on teaching and having them learn how to properly perform the exercises at first, and you build them up to it over a few weeks. But not counting those first few weeks of break-in training, learning, practicing, and gradually becoming acclimated to the discomfort, they've all trained to momentary muscle failure on every exercise. So we're talking tens of thousands of workouts and 0 injuries caused. Now, I have worked with a lot of people who came to me with injuries from other trainers, having them do all sorts of other dumb shit, your typical conventional bodybuilding workouts where they're doing 3-4 sets, moderate to high repetitions at a typical fast cadence. I've worked with people who had been injured previously doing CrossFit. I have worked with a lot of people who have been hurt doing other things, conventional things, and then not sustain any injuries working with me. And every single time I hear the same thing. This is so much harder. People are shocked at how much harder it is. It's harder, but it doesn't hurt them. The other stuff, which was not as hard, did hurt them. It's not about how hard you're training. It's about how good your form is. Most people's form is shit. That's the problem. It's not that they're training too hard. Training too hard doesn't hurt you. Shitty form hurts you.
So the case for reps, well, the contradiction for wanting to do more sets is that you're getting more reps. And the belief is this is producing more damage between the actinomycin filaments. And if we look at, just to show people what we're talking about, there doesn't seem to be any evidence that muscle damage is a good indicator of an effective exercise stimulus. So basically what's happening is the more reps, we have more cross-bridging, more connections between the myosin filament attaching and detaching from the actin filament, which in theory produces microtrauma and stimulates growth. But the way I see it, correct me if I'm wrong, even if you're holding a weight, won't the actin and myosin be attaching and detaching
you're
anyway?
Still going to have some damage. And I actually asked, there was a Stan Lindstedt, it's a professor out at, I want to say, University of Arizona. It's been a while since I talked to him about this, but had a brief email exchange because he had been doing a lot of studies on negatives and muscle damage, and asked him, was there anything that he was aware of showing that there was any significant difference in the amount of damage between different repetition frequencies when the relative duration of the positive and negative during the set was the same. So let's say you did 10 reps at a 3-3 cadence, 30 seconds spent performing the positive, 30 seconds spent performing the negative, versus 3 reps at a 10-10 cadence, which is still 30 seconds performing positive, 10 seconds performing negative. And he said he didn't think and was not aware of anything that would show that there'd be any significant difference. Also, there was another study, and I can't remember the name. This came up in the Hit List Forum just sometime in the last year, showing that there didn't seem to be a relationship between the amount of damage, the microtrauma, and the degree to which growth was stimulated. There is going to be a relationship between this and the muscle protein, the increase in muscle protein turnover that follows, because more damage, you're going to need more protein. You're going to have to clear out the damage and repair that. So there's going to increase the demands on recovery, but beyond some point, it's probably not going to stimulate any greater degree of improvement. As damage increases, you probably very quickly hit a point of diminishing and then reducing returns. Now, it does play a role. If you have damage to the sarcolemma, there's going to be some satellite cells from the sarcolemma that will move into the muscle cells and form new nuclei, and that will contribute to the ability of the muscle cell to grow. But you probably don't need very much for this to occur, and beyond some point, additional damage, it's not going to make it. And this is not just speculation. This is also based on observation. Beyond some point, it doesn't appear to make any difference. And just another thing, just empirical, people that do a lot of, things like heavy arrest pause, negative only training, tend to require more recovery time. But if on a workout to workout basis, relative to the time that there's working out, not getting any better results from it. Protocols that are very damaging probably are not going to stimulate any significant difference in your results. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, in the long run, it doesn't make any difference anyways, because it's already genetically determined. All they seem to do is make it harder or extend the time it takes your body to recover from workouts. So, and we know that the repetition frequency doesn't matter. And this is something else. James Steele, James Fisher, Wayne Westcott, all did a study. And this was, I think, actually with Luke Carlson's studios, using their trainees as subjects, comparing, I think it was 2-4, 10-10, and 30-30-30 reps. So 30-second negative, 30-second positive, 30-second negative. All to failure within that time range. Same time under load, same relative effort, but different repetition frequency. And there was no significant difference in strength or size increases. And I've seen this as well. Again, I've been doing this since 1994. And I have, for most of that time, had clients use a 10-10 cadence. And I have also used a 10-10 cadence. But there have been times when I have experimented with other repetition cadences, including 3-3, 4-4, 5-5, 3-10, 2-8, a bunch of different things. And quite frankly, none of the differences in repetition cadences made any significant difference in people's rate of progress. I know everybody likes to think that there's just something, there's some special repetition method, there's some special training technique. There isn't. There is no special way of performing your reps. And I know this is going to piss off all the people who are recommending some special repetition technique. There is no special way of performing your repetitions, none, that is going to make you any bigger or stronger in the long run than just performing normal positive and negative repetitions to failure. Again, it comes down to your effort and your genetics more than anything else. Doing something different with your range of motion, or really extending the negative, or having somebody do these like little partial flutters or whatever, none of this stuff makes any difference. It doesn't make.
Yeah, that was one of the questions back there. The individual asked, is there any benefit to, once you achieve failures, to loosen your form a little bit to get the reps?
Absolutely fucking not.
No.
In fact, that would be absolutely fucking stupid. And anybody who recommends it, you should just turn around and walk away from them. The goal is not to perform some number of repetitions. The goal is to deeply fatigue the muscles within a time frame that you respond well to. And once you have accomplished that, you are done. Doing more work beyond that point is not going to stimulate any better improvement. And if you loosen your form to do it, you're going to get hurt. Any trainer who would recommend that you loosen your form for any reason, it's fucking stupid. Absolutely fucking stupid. There is no polite way to say it. And it is irresponsible. It is unethical. You do not compromise people's safety for anything. There is no benefit. There is absolutely no benefit to loosening your form, to using any of these alternative rep methods which increase risk in different ways. There is no special rep method. There's no special set extension technique. There's nothing. There is not a single fucking thing that is going to make you any bigger or any stronger in the long run than just normal repetitions performed well and with a high intensity of effort. The reason that I recommend moving slowly isn't because it's going to give you better results. Again, it doesn't fucking matter if you're training hard and progressively and consistently. The reason I recommend moving slowly is because it's going to give you just as good results, but it's not going to hurt you if you don't loosen your form. If you are training hard, if you are training progressively, if you are training consistently, if your volume and frequency doesn't exceed what your body can recover from and adapt to, you will get as big and strong as your genetics will allow. You don't need any fancy rep methods to do it. You don't need any sophisticated programs to do it, any complicated set and rep schemes, any periodization bullshit. Learn to perform exercises well and just continually attempt to master form, to become better at efficiently and safely loading and fatiguing the target muscles. You would be better served. You will get more in the long run with less risk of injury by just trying to become as skilled as you possibly can at performing a handful of the best exercises you can do with your available equipment and your physical abilities, and not wasting your time on any bullshit repetition methods. Just try to get really good at performing exercise. Again, I don't recommend moving slowly because it's any more effective, because it's all going to be similarly effective in the long run. It's just because it'll give you just as good results more safely, and that matters. Maybe you don't think so. If you're some young 20-year-old guy, some big dumb fucking gym bro, oh, I'm not going to get hurt. Well, maybe not. You don't know. Maybe you are a little bit more durable than average. But why fucking risk it? Because you don't know. You don't know. There is no advantage. There is absolutely no advantage to moving faster during exercise. And you've got all these fucking dumbasses, absolute fucking clueless morons. Oh, you got to go heavy. If you're not training heavy, you're not going to recruit. Bullshit. You don't have to train really fucking heavy. It's not going to make any bit of fucking difference for your functional ability, your overall strength and size in the long run. Unless you are specifically training for competitive lifting, there is no reason to use a weight that is so heavy that you're not able to go for at least about a minute with it. Yeah, on average. There are some people, a little bit more fast twitch motor units, maybe a little bit higher neurological efficiency, might need a little bit lower time range, but you absolutely do not need to lift super heavy weights to get as big and strong as your genetics will allow. Again, the only time you need to lift very heavy weights is when you are specifically practicing to compete in something like powerlifting or weightlifting or strongman. Otherwise, it's not necessary. It is stupid gym bro ego lifting bullshit. And anybody that claims otherwise is simply misinformed, or they're lying to you.
Now, one critique that I heard about slow repetitions.
That's also complete bullshit.
From a self-proclaimed fitness expert wannabe YouTuber. Slow reps don't recruit fast twitch muscle fibers. His reasoning is because you'll have to use a weight that is so light to do a slow repetition that you'll never recruit fast twitch muscle fibers. The individual has no fucking clue what the force velocity curve is, apparently. And he doesn't understand the sequential order of which motor units and muscle fibers are recruited.
Henneman's principle of orderly fiber recruitment. So for the slow people out
This is
there,
hard.
and I'm not talking about rep speed, your nervous system will recruit as many muscle fibers, many motor units as necessary to produce the amount of force required to perform whatever movement you're performing. If you are lifting a weight, a certain amount of force needs to be produced. Well, as your muscles are producing this force, they're going to fatigue. And at some point, they're not going to be able to produce enough force to continue. So more motor units are recruited. And this will continue until you have recruited all of the motor units in the targeted muscles, including the fast twitch motor units, regardless of the speed of contraction. In fact, you can recruit your fast twitch motor units and stimulate them to get bigger and stronger without moving at all. If you were to take a heavy weight and just say a barbell and just hold it, zero velocity, you're not lifting it, you're not lowering it, you are holding it. This is as slow as exercise gets. It's static, meaning without movement. If you were to hold that barbell perfectly motionless for a long enough period of time, you would have recruited your fast twitch motor units despite not going fast at all. In fact, despite not even going at all. If you are working to the point of momentary muscle failure, again, we're talking about usually within 60 to 90 seconds, not more than maybe 2 minutes. If you're taking like 8, 9, 10 minutes, if you're sitting there with a little baby weight and you're like these stupid fucking gym bunny Instagram influencer bimbos, and you're just doing this over and over for like fucking 10 minutes, then you're just going to keep cycling through the same slow twitch motor units again and again and again. If we're not talking about that, we are talking about using a weight that provides enough resistance that you are going to achieve momentary muscle failure within about 1 to 2 minutes, and usually about 60 to 90 seconds is a starting point. You do not have to move fast during exercise to recruit the fast twitch motor units. You do not have to move at all to recruit the fast twitch motor units. You only have to fatigue the target muscles deeply enough within a relatively short time. And you don't need to have a super heavy weight to do that either. You are going to recruit and stimulate improvement in all the motor units in the targeted muscles. If you are working to momentary muscle failure, or again, even close to it, you will have recruited all the motor units, even the fast twitch motor units, before you get to momentary muscle failure. When you get to momentary muscle failure, you're past recruiting all of them. By this point, you've recruited all of them, and then they've fatigued to the point where you can no longer produce enough force to keep the weight moving positively, even at a really slow speed. So even if you were to stop short of momentary muscle failure, you've got your fast twitch motor units, even if you're moving extremely slowly. The only time it is necessary to move fast is if you are an athlete, a martial artist, you're involved in some sort of activity where you need to perform skills fast. You must practice performing those skills as fast as you are able to with correct mechanics. You do not have to move fast in exercise. You absolutely should not move fast you should never move fast during exercise, but you must move fast during practice after learning the correct biomechanics, and only as fast as you are able to perform the movements correctly. You don't want to try to go faster because then you're just practicing doing it wrong. But there is a place for very fast movement, for explosive movements. Exercise is not that place, though. That is practice. Different situations. But you do not have to move fast during exercise. You don't have to move at all during exercise to stimulate all the motor units, including the fast
individual
target.
So the follow-up was, okay, so we shouldn't move slowly because it doesn't recruit fast twitch motor units, which is so stupid it's hard to even say. So the follow-up was, so how should we lift? The response was explosively, as fast as you can, is what this self-proclaimed fitness expert suggested, contradicting what you just said. And you literally just said there's absolutely no reason to exercise explosively. Practice,
No.
yes. Exercise, no.
You have to practice. If you were going to be doing something like boxing and you only practiced with very slow and you never actually, that would be incredibly stupid. But it would also be incredibly stupid for you to move fast during exercise because it's not necessary. And the only thing that moving faster during exercise is going to do is increase your risk of injury, and it will improve your skill in moving faster in the specific exercises, but that skill is not going to transfer to improved speed in any other activity. So you should never move fast during exercise. But if you are practicing a skill that requires fast movement, you must move as fast as you can correctly when you are practicing that.
So another critique from this self-proclaimed fitness expert is moving quickly between exercises is bad because you will not allow your fast twitch motor units to recover, and you will just go backwards to your slow twitch motor units.
Again, this is
under the assumption you need to be. So he said moving quickly between sets. That's again under the assumption you need more than one set. And if your exercise if your workout and your exercise order is properly selected, then you will not be training the same muscle group 2 sets or 2 exercises in a row. You will be recruiting a different set of fast twitch motor units. So what he said makes absolutely no fucking sense. But we do want to move relatively quickly between exercises, not sets, because if you're doing a set properly, more than one appears to provide no additional benefit. So why, physiologically, would we want to move a little more quickly? Obviously, cardiovascular improvements.
It's cardiovascular improvement. And even that is a little bit iffy. I'm trying to find the post. This actually came up in my hit list forum not too long ago. Somebody brought up one of Schoenfeld's studies and said, well, this says you should rest long between exercises. Why are you recommending moving short? And there's a bunch of other studies that show, no, it doesn't make any difference. You don't. And we're just talking about strength and size increases. So a couple things. One, the research does not show any significant difference. And like I said at the very beginning, ultimately it's going to come down to your genetics more than anything else. There's not going to be any significant difference in the long run in strength and size increases if you're moving more quickly or if you're resting longer, even between multiple sets. So one, you don't need to do multiple sets of the same exercise. If you do the first set to momentary muscle failure, that's enough. Any additional sets are at best a waste of time and more often than not counterproductive. If you are, and now most people don't even need to perform more than maybe 2 exercises that have overlapping target muscle groups in a workout. This is usually for beginners who might perform 2 compound pushing exercises, 2 compound pulling exercises, 2 compound lower body exercises, a squatting movement, and a trunk extension or hinging movement. There's going to be some overlap. But a beginner is not going to be training so intensely yet that that's excessive for them. But even if you do this, if you are alternating between muscle groups or alternating between exercises targeting different muscle groups, the overlap is going to be minimal. It's really not a problem. And the assumption here is that it's going to reduce the, well, one, it's not going to prevent you from recruiting those fast twitch motor units again. After you perform an exercise, all of this is going to recover enough that you're going to be able to perform another exercise, even if there is some overlap, as long as you're not doing them back to back, which is usually not the case. For example, if you were to perform leg press, pull down, chest press, and then a trunk extension, a compound row, an overhead press, 3 compound exercises, lower body, a pull, a push, and then 3 more lower body, pull, push. You've got 2 exercises between the first leg and the second leg exercise. There's some overlap. It's not going to make that much of a difference. Even if you're moving quickly between exercises, if you're using a 60 to 90 time under load on average, about 75 seconds or so per exercise, you're looking at 2.5 to 3 minutes between the 2 exercises with the overlapping target muscle groups. It's not a problem. All of these things that they think are problems are based on erroneous assumptions about how workouts should be designed. If you understand how these things should be put together and performed, none of this is an issue. Also, people have this idea that we strength train for bigger, stronger muscles, and then we have to do cardio for cardiovascular and metabolic conditioning, and then we do something else completely for flexibility. They have this compartmentalization of these activities, and it's not necessary. Exercise, and really, I hate to say it's strength training. We say strength training because that's just what people are used to referring to it as. But proper strength training is not just for strength. When you do this correctly, this is the most effective way and the safest way to improve all of the general trainable factors of functional ability. When we are designing an exercise program, when we are considering the best way to perform an exercise, we are not just focusing on what is required to stimulate muscular strength and size increases. Now, muscular strength and size increases are by far the most important factor, something that most of these exercise physiologist dweebs still can't seem to figure it out. It's the muscles are the most important thing, not the cardiovascular system. The muscles are the only directly productive factor of functional ability. It is your muscles that are moving you. The cardiovascular system supports the muscles in doing their job. Exercise is first and foremost about the muscles, and the muscles are the window to the rest of the body. If you want to get at your cardiovascular system, you have to go through your muscles. These fucking dweebs and their jogging and their stationary cycles and their VO2 and all this is silly bullshit. The focus should be on the muscles, but cardiovascular system is important. We want to also address that. When we are designing an exercise program, when we're thinking about how to perform exercises, we're not just thinking about muscular strength and size. And I get that this pisses me off so fucking much. I get people who ask me, well, shouldn't we do this way because this is going to be better for getting stronger? No. We have to consider all these other factors. People get so caught up in just this one little thing. Oh, this particular thing is going to be best for this. You have to consider all of the things we are trying to accomplish, all of the requirements, and you also have to consider all of the things we are trying to minimize or avoid, the constraints. All of these things, not get latched. Oh, this is such study said that this would be a better way to stimulate hypertrophy. First off, it doesn't make any fucking difference in the long run because it's already genetically determined. But second, we're not just after bigger and stronger muscles. Your cardiovascular and metabolic conditioning are also important. That's part of the reason you are better off with a little bit longer set duration, more metabolic stress, greater cardiovascular demand. Now, as for moving quickly between exercises, it appears to be more effective for maintaining the heart rate elevation, but it might not be necessary to keep the heart rate elevated. Or actually, what I should say is to keep the cardiac output elevated. This is a whole nother topic. People get so caught up with heart rate. Stroke volume is also important. And if you exercise properly and if you're breathing properly during exercise, you're going to have greater stroke volume, which means you don't need the same heart rate elevation to achieve the same degree of cardiac output. Anyways, resting very short between exercises, moving from one to the next as quickly as you can stand it might provide better cardiovascular conditioning. but it's looking more and more like as long as you are performing enough very metabolically demanding exercises in the workout, which doesn't need to be a lot, you don't necessarily have to do them very, very quickly. The cardiovascular demands of something like a properly performed HIIT workout with compound exercises are going to be similar to sprint interval training. And there have been a bunch of studies on this showing that even if you're doing, like a 30 to 60 second sprint or whatever, and then resting for several minutes in between, you're going to get similar cardiovascular benefits as if you were doing 30 something minutes continuous of some steady state activity at a moderate intensity. So Doug McGuff and I actually talked about this in another video, and it's on YouTube, about high intensity training for metabolic and cardiovascular conditioning. So here's what I recommend, though, is because I'm still a little skeptical. I would rather err on the side of making workouts harder. And so as a general rule, I would recommend that you move from one exercise to the next, not from one set to the next, because you don't need a second set of any exercise, but from one exercise to the next quickly enough that your heart and breath rate do not return to normal. But you should not move from one exercise to the next so quickly that you begin to become winded, lightheaded, dizzy, faint, nauseated. If you start feeling any of these things, then wait until they pass before you attempt the next exercise. And how much time this takes is going to vary between individuals. For somebody with really poor metabolic and cardiovascular conditioning, it might take a little longer. For somebody with really good conditioning, it might take a little bit less time. But it is absolutely not true that rushing between exercises is going to have any negative effect on your long-term muscular strength and size increases. I suspect, again, that recommendation is based on the erroneous assumption that you need to perform multiple sets, the erroneous assumption that if you reduce the weight you're able to perform for subsequent sets, that it reduces your results, and the fact that some people just don't want to do this kind of training because it is unpleasant. It's more effective, it's safe, or I should say it's safer, it's far more time efficient, it's just as effective, far more relative to the time compared with anything else, but it is hard. That's part of the reason a lot of people just don't want to do it. And it doesn't give them an excuse to be in the gym for 2 hours, 5 nights a week socializing. If you train properly, you don't need to be in the gym more than an hour a week. And some people can get in and out in much less, as long as it's not too busy, and they're not waiting for dumbasses performing multiple sets and twiddling their thumbs and their phones in between.
Now, I want to cover one more argument, and then we'll answer some questions that we haven't already answered before. One critique was, when it comes to single set training to multiple set training, failure, etc., low frequency, that the studies that I'm referring to, you are referring to, are outdated. Now, upon further review, as I bring up Brad Schoenfeld's recent study, he referred to the same studies.
It doesn't matter how old a study is. If the study is well designed, if it uses the proper methods of measuring what it purports to measure, if the conclusions are supported by the data collected, then it doesn't matter if the study came out in 1950 or if it came out yesterday. It's still valid. If it's properly designed and conducted, and if the conclusions are supported by the data, the study is valid. It doesn't matter when it was performed.
Right. And it's funny that he said that. So I look at the most recent literature promoting multiple set training, which was 2016. And they compiled the same exact research that I refer to on a regular basis. which is interesting. So that critique is debunked.
Yeah, it is. You have to look at each individual study on its own merits. And here's something that is important. There's a lot of studies, especially in exercise, that are just complete shit. And they're terrible because the study designs themselves are based on erroneous assumptions. And the testing is not appropriate to what they are actually trying to measure. The constant use of 1 repetition maximums to test strength, when 1 repetition maximum performance is also affected by skill and also some specific neural adaptations, they shouldn't be using 1 rep max to test strength. They should be probably using statics, using different equipment for testing than the equipment used to perform the workouts to minimize the effect of skill on test performance. So there's all sorts of problems with the assumptions underlying the study designs, with the testing methods that are used, with loose controls, sometimes with the complete failure to specify or standardize very important aspects of exercise performance. There's so much wrong, but you can still look at studies and with consideration for all, if you take into consideration all of the things that they did wrong and how these affect the outcome, you can still sometimes get something valuable from them. So even if a study is poorly designed, if you understand why it's poorly designed and what the consequences are, it can still be useful. But a lot of exercise research is just garbage, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I've noticed
that's not
some
about
of the studies. If a study is using a skill-based movement like a bench press or a squat to measure strength improvements, I completely disregard it to begin with. But
the using 1 rep max is appropriate if you specifically want to know what approach is better for increasing your 1 rep max, which again, the 1 rep max performance doesn't just measure skill. It also measures skill or doesn't just measure strength. It is also a measure of skill in the specific 1 rep maximum. And that's not something that's going to transfer to a lot of other activities. Unfortunately, there's a lot of research making this mistake that unfortunately negatively affects the conclusions. They're making erroneous conclusions because they have erroneous assumptions about the validity of these types of tests.
Mm-hmm. Now, one question is, all right, I get this one a lot. If someone did only timed static contraction training, would they be able to achieve the same fitness potential compared to if they included dynamic exercise?
Except for flexibility, yes. That is the only thing that time static contraction is not going to effectively improve. If you perform a time static contraction, you're going to accomplish the same thing that you would performing a dynamic exercise. You are going to deeply fatigue the target muscle groups within a relatively short time. There are all sorts of beliefs about transfer of strength from different, but it's simply is not the case. You do not need to train. I see a lot of people talking about angle training, and you got to train your muscles in the stretch position and then in their peak position. And this is all nonsense. There is no reason that you would have to train a muscle in every single part of its range of motion to be able to effectively strengthen the muscle, regardless of where you are in the range of motion. If the muscle is contracting and you fatigue it deeply enough, you are going to end up recruiting and stimulating improvements in all the motor units, all the muscle fibers in that muscle, regardless of whether you move into every position, every degree of shortening and lengthening that it's capable of. But if you're not moving into a stretch, then it's not going to do anything to improve flexibility. Now, if somebody is relatively active and they are involved in activities where they're regularly moving through relatively full range of motion, then their flexibility is probably already fine and it's not going to make much of a difference. But other than flexibility, time static contraction or feedback statics, which is static contraction using force measure and display are going to be just as effective for everything else.
Let's see. Some of the questions are really bad, so I'm ignoring them. All right, let's see. Israel refers to stimulus to fatigue ratio. What is that? I mean, we've kind of covered that. Doing multiple sets is accumulating more fatigue and more stress with no additional stimulus.
Yeah, it's just he's talking about the degree to which the body is stimulated to produce the improvements in muscular strength and size relative to the total fatigue. Here's the thing, though. We need to have a certain amount of fatigue. We don't want to have too much. We don't want to have too little. But as I mentioned before, quite frankly, in the long run, your genetics determine it. If you have a little bit longer, a little bit shorter sets, it's not going to make that. Well, some people, fiber type, neurological efficiency will respond a little better to a little shorter versus a little bit longer. But it's not going to make a huge difference. We don't want to have, and I've just argued with some stupid fucking gym bro the other day about this, who insisted that you should perform sets to failure in like 20, 25 seconds because of this. No. Again, we are not only concerned with muscular strength and size increases. We want to exercise in a way that stimulates improvements in all of the general trainable factors of functional ability, because we do not, they're important, but we don't want to have to perform other activities. Just, you don't want to do strength training and then also do cardio, because most cardio activities, first off, they're not necessary if you strength train properly. It's additional time, and these things tend to beat up your joints and are less safe for the cardiovascular system than properly performed strength training. So I think that what they're talking about, or I would have to see the entire thing in context. This is just, he says he refers to stimulus to fatigue ratio. Okay, he refers to it. What is he saying about it? Without knowing what the fuck that they're asking, people need to learn to compose questions.
Yeah, I know. Some of them are very, very vague.
I'm used to, I shouldn't say I'm used to this. It's sometimes when a person asks a question, you have to go back and forth a couple times until they are able to clarify exactly what it is that they are asking. Can I have your thoughts on such and such? Well, what the fuck? Thoughts. Never fucking ask somebody whose time is valuable for their thoughts. You need to be really fucking specific, because you have no idea how much there might be to a particular topic.
So does training
This is a better
stay
question.
the same? Training stay the same for people who are reaching or near their genetic potential?
The principles stay the same, but the closer you get to your limits of your genetic potential, there appears to be a decrease in the rate of progress. Progress seems to follow an asymptotic curve, where very rapid improvement initially, and the closer you get to your potential, the more it levels off. And this has some consequences for rate of progression, how much weight you should be adding each time you go up. There is a difference in the volume and frequency that some people should perform as they become more advanced, because the better you get at an exercise and the more muscle mass you have, the greater the demands that you are capable of placing on your body during each exercise, and this is going to affect recovery. A lot of people have this idea that the more advanced you get, the more exercise you need, the longer you should work out, and the more frequently, and it's completely backwards. It is the opposite. A beginner, because they have not yet learned to exercise as intensely as they're capable of, because they don't have as much muscle mass, they're not creating as much stress in the body, is capable of training more. They're doing more volume more frequently, because they're not putting as much of a demand on their body with each workout. But as somebody gets better at exercising, and being better at exercising doesn't mean you're able to do more reps with some weight or lift more weight. That's being stronger. Being better at exercise means being better at creating a demand on and efficiently and safely inroading the target muscle groups. The better you get at exercising, the greater the demands you are placing on your body, the more muscle mass you grow and the more tissue that's working during your exercises, the greater that stress, the more conservative you need to be with your volume and frequency. So as somebody becomes more advanced, they should not be working out longer and more often. They should be even more conservative with the number of exercises they're doing in each workout and how often they do them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had to experience that too. I've had to cut back on volume significantly the longer I've been training. This question, I mean, would you recommend lower time under load for bent over rows as lumbar extenders appear to fatigue too early when doing super slow? Yeah, I think maybe, I don't know why. What I think he should do is just continue to do the exercise and let his lumbar extensor muscles catch up, right?
This is more a very good exercise order than anything else. If somebody is, first off, you are going to stiff-legged deadlift a hell of a lot more than you are going to row if you are rowing with strict form and not yanking the bar up and down. You are stronger statically than you are dynamically. So whatever you can do for a stiff-legged deadlift, you're going to be able to hold in that position for a good amount of time, and you should not be rowing with nearly as much as you stiff-legged deadlift. If you perform the row before performing any other exercises which are fatiguing to the back, this should not be an issue. Or if you allow adequate rest after any exercises that are fatiguing to the back before performing the row. Better yet, use a seated cable row or a compound row machine with chest support.
Right. Yeah. I personally am not a fan of a bent over row at all. Let's see. For heart health,
if all you've got is a barbell, all you've got is a barbell. But that shouldn't be a problem as long as a person is doing them correctly and with an appropriate load.
So for heart health, is it not good to have heart rate elevated more than once or twice per week through activities, or what most people call exercise or cardio?
Doesn't appear to be necessary. If you're doing it once or twice a week where you have significant elevation, that's enough. You can't sit on your ass and do nothing the rest of the time. There are circulatory benefits to regular movement. There's benefits to joint health, immune health, movement of lymph through the body from just moving around on a regular basis. You wouldn't want to work out twice a week and spend the rest of your time polishing a chair with your ass. But you do not need to do this more frequently than that. I have had women, and I remember a particular one comes to mind. I had a female client who was in her 50s and just phenomenal shape for her age. But a good example, her cardiologist was the same cardiologist at a lot of the Orlando Magic use. And he was shocked at her conditioning and did not believe her when she told him that all she did was just 2 brief high-intensity strength training workouts once weekly. He did not believe it because of how good her conditioning was. And I've heard similar things from other clients from their cardiologists that because they're cardiology, and I've talked with, I'm sick to death of having to explain this shit to them. Got into this with the cardiologist. It was like 2 years ago. Oh, you have to, are you doing any walking or, well, yeah, but I exercise. Oh, well, what do you do for exercise? I strength train. Oh, well, you also need to do this. And I said, no, you don't. No, you don't. And I explained it to them. And they should fucking know better, but they don't. What are you doing when you're running? What are you doing when you're swimming, when you're cycling? You are performing movement against resistance. You are using your muscles. You're placing a demand on your muscles. And it is the metabolic work your muscles are performing to produce the force required to move you that creates the demand of the cardiovascular system. If you strength train properly, you are going to create similar or greater cardiovascular demands, but you're going to do so in a way that is safer for your heart, because with the stronger muscular contractions, you are driving more venous blood to the heart. A whole bunch more going through here. Starling's law, you end up with greater filling of the left ventricle, less stress. It's less demanding for it to then pump that blood out. And you also have a larger ejection fraction. The stroke volume is higher. With a higher stroke volume, you have two things happening. With the higher stroke volume, you get the same cardiac output with less of an increase in heart rate. And at the same time, you have more cardiac coronary blood flow, greater cardiac perfusion, better blood flow to the heart with lower heart rate for the same cardiac output because of the higher stroke volume, because of the greater venous return, because of the stronger muscular contractions. And you can also create a much greater metabolic demand, contracting the muscles against resistance during exercise using slow and controlled movements without beating up your joints or increasing risk of pulls, strains, tears, like you would if you are trying to move very rapidly, sprinting, cycling, swimming, and doing these other things. So proper exercise, and these other things aren't, running isn't exercise. Swimming is not exercise. Cycling is not exercise. No other activity is exercise. People have this idea that just because they're doing something physical that involves effort, that it's exercise. And I've had people say, "Oh, you don't think it's exercise because you haven't done it. This is really hard." So fucking what? Hard? Hard is not the only requirement. Exercise is not just any physical activity that's hard. Exercise is an activity that is specifically designed for the purpose of stimulating improvements in muscular strength and size and the other general trainable factors of functional ability while minimizing your risk of acute and subacute injuries for the purpose of improving your functional ability and health. Exercise is an activity very specifically designed for that purpose, not some other physical activity that has some other purpose that happens to be hard. None of these other activities do what exercise does as well as it does, as safely as it does. They're not exercise. They may have a conditioning effect. They may have physical benefits, but they're not exercise. Just because they're not exercise doesn't mean there may not be some benefit to doing them under some circumstances, but they're not exercise. Important to make this distinction. Anyways, there is no general performance or health benefit that you're going to get from these other steady state or sprint interval activities that you cannot obtain more effectively and more safely in a much shorter time with exercise, meaning high intensity, low velocity circuit strength training. And we've known
question
this
here
in the 70s. They should be embarrassed.
So yeah, I mean, as you just properly defined exercise, which answers this question, which is kind of why I popped it up. I mean, people are talking about exercise for mental health. We're not saying you shouldn't do any sort of movement every day. Of course you should, but we need to define exercise properly, which is a specific activity.
They're not even talking about exercise, daily exercise.
Right. They're talking about recreation.
Yeah. If you look at these studies, they're not exercise studies. They are activity studies. What it should say is many studies cite the psychological benefits of daily physical activity.
Right.
You should be moving around. There are health benefits. There's physical and mental health benefits to regular physical activity, but it's not exercise. It doesn't replace exercise. And you absolutely should not exercise daily. That would be, if you actually exercise correctly, the absolute most anybody should do is maybe 3 days a week on non-consecutive days. And most people should not train more than once weekly. And many people will get better results exercising even less frequently than that. As far as mental health, exercise can benefit mental health because when you actually perform it correctly, it requires a tremendous amount of focused attention. It is almost like Zen meditation when you do it right with the right mindset. But for mental health, go do things that you enjoy, ideally outside and with other people. But that's activity. That's not exercise.
We'll ask one more question because I'm sure mine and Drew's bladder is about to explode again. Can cardio be useful as an extra way to lose body fat if you're already doing HIIT and don't want to decrease your diet?
If you don't want to decrease your diet, get used to staying fat. There's no fucking way around it. There is none. You can reduce your calorie intake or you can stay fat. Those are your choices. Cardio is not going to make one bit of difference. Our bodies do an amazing job of constraining our daily energy expenditure. Our bodies do not want the amount of calories we burn to increase too much. So if we become more physically active, a couple things. One, most people grossly overestimate the calories burned by physical activity. Those numbers you see on the treadmill, on the cycle ergometer, those are grossly exaggerated. And a lot of times that's not the calories you're burning because of the activity. That's the estimated calories you're burning during the activity, including energy that you would have spent anyway sitting around doing nothing. So no activity is going to burn enough calories to make any difference. And even if you do burn a lot of calories, your body reduces the energy it spends on other processes to prevent your overall metabolic rate from going up too much. You can't make a difference with it. There was a great book that came out, I think it was just last year, by anthropologist Herman Poncer, called Burn. And he goes over a lot of research on this. They studied the activity and energy expenditure of the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer population in Africa. And they compared this to people in Western populations and found, despite most of the Hadza performing more physical activity in a day than most Westerners do in a week, the energy expenditure still tracked with pretty much age, sex, and body size. So as much activity as they engaged in, it didn't make no difference for their daily energy expenditure. You can do all the cardio you want. It's not going to make any fucking difference for your fat loss. Except it's harder to stuff shit in your face when you're physically active. Ken Hutchins pointed this out back in the 90s. A lot of people, they get involved in some kind of physical activity. They take up a project. Maybe they're renovating their house or something, or they start going out and doing something, and they notice that they're losing weight. And they assume it's because they're burning all these additional calories doing this activity, when it's preoccupation. It is harder for you to be stuffing cookies and chips and other shit in your face when you are pulling, your kitchen apart and moving things around and tearing up tile or whatever, than if you're sitting on the couch in front of the TV. So preoccupation contributes to this because it reduces what you're shoving in your face, but the calories don't make any difference. And one of the most interesting things that they reported was there was a group of people. There was a study. They took these people who were completely sedentary and they had them start training to run a half marathon. And I think they built up to where they were running something like 12 miles 5 days a week. Didn't do it all at once, but they gradually built them up to it. And they noticed for about the first 2 weeks, there was a little bit of an increase in daily energy expenditure, and then their bodies adapted to it. And then it didn't make any difference. So they went from being sedentary to training for a half marathon, and it didn't make any difference. If you want to lose fat, you have to eat less. There's no way around it. And I know there's going to be a bunch of fad diet cultists that are going to get all butthurt and say, no, it's the insulin, or no, you can't eat any plants because they're poisonous. And then you get your vegan fucking weirdos. There's all these and the intermittent fasting and the keto, and it comes down to calories. Whether you like it or not, any diet that is going to cause you to lose fat causes you to lose fat because it results in a calorie deficit. If you want to lose fat, you must reduce your calorie intake. And if you want to lose fat without losing a lot of muscle mass along with it, you need to make sure you keep your protein intake up and that you continue to exercise properly. But adding cardio is not going to make any bit of difference. What it will do is beat you up and it will increase your appetite, which will make it harder for you to be consistent with your diet. In fact, I'm in this process right now. Now, I have been really lazy with my diet for the past couple of years, allowed myself to put on way more body fat than I should have. And unfortunately, when you're in the field of exercise and health, a lot of people are going to assume that the value of your information is directly proportional to how jacked and ripped you are. So, despite the fact that it's not going to make any difference to the merits of or the value of the information I provide, for the sake of marketing, I'm getting ripped again, and to have better pictures for upcoming books. And I should be in pretty ripped condition by around late January, early February. And I've already dropped about 16 pounds since the beginning of August. And in that time, I've only worked out twice a week, about 20 minutes at a time. And I haven't done anything else for exercise. In fact, that's the only thing that counts as exercising. I'm not doing any cardio. None. There's no need to. It's not going to make any fucking difference. I got ripped in college for modeling, for bodybuilding, without doing any cardio. I've turned 49 in August, and I am going to be ripped late January, maybe in February, and I'm not going to do any fucking cardio. And also, I'm not going to work out more than 3 hours in any month. About 20 minutes twice a week, 40 minutes a week. I think, roughly about probably less than 3 hours. With less than 3 hours of exercise per month and no cardio, I will be ripped. And I will
do ab exercises?
Huh?
Will you be doing abdominal exercises?
One set. I've got a hammer strength deadlift. Oh, Hammer Strength calls it the squat lunge. That's a stupid fucking name. Hammer Strength changed the name. This is not a squat lunge. It's a deadlift shrug machine. That's what you should call it. And if you lie on your back inside the machine and you hold the handles, you can use it to add resistance to crunches, but that's it. And I do that once every third workout. So maybe 2 or 3 times a month I will do. So 2 or 3 sets of abs per month. That's the only direct abdominal exercise I'm doing.
There was a time where you did no abdominal exercises and still got ripped.
I did no abdominal exercises for about 6 months when I was dieting for a competition. I didn't start dieting for the competition 6 months out. I did that way too soon, about 2 months out. But I hadn't done any direct abdominal exercise for about 6 months before that, and didn't add any when I was dieting for the competition, just to prove a point that you could have ripped abs without doing any. Now, you can have ripped abs without doing any direct abdominal exercise. You can also do all the abdominal exercise you want, and if you're not lean, it's not going to make any fucking difference for your abs. But if you are very lean, and when I say very lean, I'm talking about if you get your body fat percentage down to the mid single digits or below, then it will make a difference. But unless you're that lean, it's not going to make any significant difference. And all you need to do is 1 set of 1 abdominal exercise, maybe alternate between workouts if you do flexion with rotation or lateral flexion. I'm just doing flexion. Not bothering with both. And that's enough. People who think they need an entire workout for their abs, then misinformed. You do not have to do an entire 1 set of 1 or maybe 2 exercises, and not even in the same workout, is as much as you need for abs. You don't need to be doing fucking half-hour ab workouts.
Yeah, some people go and they finish their workout with I haven't done an abdominal exercise probably over a year. And it was probably for demonstration purposes.
If I wasn't specifically trying to get as lean as possible right now, and if I didn't think it might make a little bit of a difference, I probably wouldn't. But again, 1 set every third workout. So
what's it going to cost you? Yeah. All right, guys. Well, we'll wrap up here. We debunked a lot of stuff. It's going to be very interesting to hear counter arguments to what we just went over. I don't know how there could possibly be any.
There aren't any counter arguments. There's just impotent whines. They can try to argue, but they'll be wrong.
Yeah.
Actually,
So if you
all
guys
they'll do is tell us the different ways that they're misinformed.
Basically, yeah. Or just misinterpret things that they've read or regurgitate nonsense that they've heard from Brad Schoenfeld, Mike Israel, who else? BioLane is a new guy people are sending to me. Completely doesn't understand what they're talking about. But this is it, guys. This is, I mean, I don't know how much more clearly this can be explained. We actually went through the research. If you want to learn more detail about this, join the hit list, Drew Bay's hit list, Baye.com. This forum, he goes in very, very, very deep detail. And I've been a member for probably over 2 years now and always will be. So if you guys want to really dive into the detail with this, if you're a trainer, definitely do it. Or if you're just curious, the hit list, Baye.com, it's $20 a
couple
month.
People asking about what I did when I got ripped before, and I am journaling all of this in the hit list forum, talking about exactly what I'm doing with my workouts, exactly what I'm doing with my diet. I'm actually recording and posting most of the workouts with commentary and talking about what I am doing a little differently compared to what I did when I got ripped for competition in college, and why the approach that I'm using now is going to result in me having, even being, almost 30 years older, I'm going to look better when I'm ripped now than I did that, partly because I'm not rushing it. Anyways, so yeah, all the questions, all the other stuff people are asking about here, if you join the forum, I'll cover all that in detail there. And it's just at Baye.com.
Baye.com, hit list forum. More information that you could ever imagine. I think it's excellent. I'll always be a member. So if you guys could do us a favor, like, share, subscribe to Drew at, I believe it's Drew Bay's High Intensity Training is the name of your YouTube channel. But Drew posts most of his content in the hit list. And for $5 a week, I don't know how the fuck you're going to learn anymore. You possibly could. So, all right, guys, that's it. That's it for us today. Like, subscribe, do all that nonsense, share the video. And, maybe we'll be back. Drew and I are actually going to film an in the gym video soon. And we're probably going to, have it edited into a bunch of different videos going over these concepts and showing these concepts in person. So be on the lookout for that. And we'll be releasing that soon. All right, everybody. Thank you. Share this shit if you want to get this information out there. And thanks for joining.